This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. Hello everyone and welcome back to Basket Case Clubs, coming to you live this week from very, very wet southeast Queensland. My name's Michael Connolly. I'll be your host for this wet episode, and joining me always is my brother and partner in basket casey goodness, Steve Connolly. G'day, Steve.
G'day. Yes, indeed. It's wet. We're slowly drying out, but a lot of places throughout the southeast corner of Queensland have not fared as well as others, particularly a lot of our sporting facilities.
Yeah, I got to say that was particularly difficult to do that with such a chipper voice. I got to admit, Steve, I'm just totes devoed. I'm so upset for how many of our friends are struggling at the moment. It's times like this that we're reminded where we build our sports fields in Queensland and in Australia. And that's on floodplains and on dumps. So every time it rains, we're screwed. Like in the north of the state here, in the north of the country, we have cyclones. In where we are, we have floods. When you get further south and further west, we have fires. So there's no end, just as we're talking about with some excitement about a season starting for 2022, and holy shit, the sky just opened for days and days. It was incredible. Like, we've got a pool and I'm sure that I emptied 300 mils out yesterday alone. We've had well over a meter of rain. There are places in the country that don't see that in a year, and we've had that in a freaking weekend.
There are places in the country that haven't seen that since the 60s. The whole cumulative period from, the 60s to now. Yep. But it's what fascinates me is that whenever a natural disaster hits, and as you mentioned briefly there, we know that we're not alone. Australia is subject to some pretty crazy weather. But what fascinates me is when something like this happens, it always seems like such a short period of time since the last natural disaster. So obviously here in the southeast corner, we've had some nasty floods since 2011-12, but 11 odd years ago is when Brisbane was largely inundated, and we saw a lot of sporting facilities, as well as obviously people's homes, tragically, but we saw a lot of sporting facilities just cop an absolute smashing, and hundreds and millions of dollars have been poured into the repair on those facilities in the years since, and a lot of them have just been inundated again.
Yeah, and when people have just bought houses that flooded only 11 years ago, and you think to yourself,
but that was a 1 in 100 year.
Yeah, flood. So we're right for another 100 years. Okay, that's not how it works, and I don't think 2011 ended up being a Q100 event anyway, did it?
I don't believe so.
No, so it's not how it works, and especially in these low-lying areas where, why we build sports fields on floodplains? It's because we don't want to have houses or retail or commercial facilities there that are getting flooded all the time. Plus, it's also an area, as far as urban design goes, these areas are actually designed to absorb rising floodwaters, so that it protects the areas around them. And that's why if ever you're in a club and you've wanted to do some development and council said, no, you can't do that, that could be a reason, because if you fill in a floodplain, then it means if the water can no longer flood that area of your sports field or your sporting precinct, that water's got to go somewhere else. It will rise and then could go into somebody's house or shop. That's not to say, of course, in this case, again, that houses and shops in the western Brisbane, in Milton, in Toowong, all didn't go underwater again, which they have. And we've got schools shut today. Don't know exactly how long that's going to be, but today is Monday, the 28th of February, and schools are shut. So I know your kids are really upset about that.
Devastated,
yeah. Poor things, having to stay home. But you know what it's going to be like when people get back to it. So when people come home after being evacuated, or people get back to their sporting clubs. And I know that we've got lots of friends who have been out busy this morning, who've been able to get there, out busily cleaning up some sports grounds. So I just wanted to share with you some of the really sad stories. The first one, obviously, is that 7 people have lost their lives so far. So that's just tragic. We've got, for those of you who aren't in Queensland, we've got what I think is one of the greatest ad campaigns here. And it's very simply, if it's flooded, forget it. which is to stop people from driving into or trying to cross floodwaters. Because it's very easy to think, oh, but it's only shallow. I can make it. Plus, I've got a Prado. I've got a RAV4. I can make it. This was built for this sort of thing. And then water moves very, very fast. And as soon as the car starts flooding, and so unfortunately, we've lost a few lives there. So that's incredibly sad. The loss of life wasn't as great as it was in 2011, where 35 people died. And that was largely because of the differences in the amount of rain that fell and where it fell, and the severe flooding of the Brisbane Valley at that time. But that's the worst thing about this. So before we go on and talk about how sad it is for loss of property and damage to sporting facilities, that's just to keep it in context. That's obviously the worst of it. A friend of mine, his son was supposed to play a game of football at Mitchelton yesterday, and that game ended up being cancelled quite late. And today it has become clear why. Mitchelton is one of a couple of really, really good synthetic football fields in Brisbane. And unfortunately, it looks like an unmade bed, a football field-sized unmade bed. It is just incredible. The surface is obviously flooded from the bottom. You can, in the photos that you can see on Facebook, you can see the subsurface, you can see the synthetic grass itself, and it has just floated and just tossed goals, soccer goals around like they're playthings. We've got our friends at Western Districts Netball, Steve, who I know that you've dealt with them a number of times on flood recovery being one of them. And it's underwater again. The water's lapping at the ceiling of the first floor of their clubhouse. It's just so sad to see. We were speaking with Queensland Rugby League this morning, and in the flood affected local government areas, they have 153 clubs. So that's half of their clubs are in this flood affected area. So we don't yet know the number of flood affected clubs, those that have actually experienced damage. But even the fact that the fields have been so heavily inundated is going to make it very difficult to start a season. As I said, when we were so excited about getting a season.
Yeah. Devastating. Yep.
Yeah, it really is very, very sad. So what are the sorts of things that go wrong in these times? Obviously, putting aside safety issues and keeping people safe, the impact that floods and cyclones and fires, so any natural disaster has on a sporting facility, can be really, really wide ranging. So obviously the field damage and the clubhouse damage is probably the most noticeable, but it doesn't stop just there. You've got the fields, you've got the clubhouses, you've got the storage sheds. There's one, it's quite a sad photo of a shipping container that's obviously full of fairly important equipment I think it's at Mitchelton Football Club, just floated up against the side of a shed. So the impact from a shipping container being thrown at a shed is significant. But what about everything that's in that container? What about all of the footballs, all of the pads, all of the nets, all of the markers? Even if they're not destroyed, they're so covered in crap. Because when you think about it, when the floodwater rises, if it goes over the seat of a toilet, then the water that's coming out of that toilet is pretty shitty, isn't it?
It's not just water. Yes.
Yes. Oh, so yes. So it's all of the equipment that gets damaged as well. But then when you try and get back into it, you've got all of the cleanup, because when the silt that is full of bacteria settles, it's not only settling on the floor that you can see, it's settling behind the gyprock on the frame and underneath the frame where the frame is connected to the slab that you can't see. So the cleanup that has to happen is so great when water actually comes into a building, and it's because it just gets everywhere. So even if you think it's clean, months later you'll say, what is that weird smell that I can smell? It doesn't get any better. The other thing that happens at this time, Steve, which is unfortunate, is that we have some really important documents that live in filing cabinets in these clubhouses that just end up as brown mush at the mouth of the Bremer River or the mouth of the Fitzroy River or the mouth of the Brisbane River. And it's always sad when those documents haven't been backed up somewhere. But it's even sadder if they have been backed up, if they've been scanned and copied onto a computer that's sitting on the desk right next to the filing cabinet.
Yep.
And that computer then has been backed up onto a USB hard disk that's sitting on the desk next to the computer.
And in business, we all understand the importance of offsite backups and redundancies, so that if something goes wrong at your office building, we've got, backed up versions of documents stored elsewhere. But unfortunately, that's the sort of stuff that, volunteers in sporting clubs are asked about after an event like this.
Yeah.
Oh, so did you have all that stuff backed up? Where were you 2 weeks ago? But I must say that this has certainly, in my experience, become a lot less of a concern in the last 11 or so years, since the last big, Brisbane floods, at least, where clubs recognise the need to do that. Well, digitisation in the first instance. So let's get away from as much of the hard copy documents and data storage as we possibly can, and let's digitize also as many of our systems. So, gone are the days of turning up for sign on and people filling in hard copy forms to only then have to be entered by the poor registrar into the digital system.
Yeah.
So let's cut out.
We keep the pink one, and the yellow one goes to our state, and the white one gets kept.
That's right. Yeah. All the duplicates. Yeah.
Triplicates. Quadruplicates sometimes. What do we do with the green one again? Why? I don't know, but the green one goes in the filing cabinet. Why? Because Shirley said it does.
So that's gotten a lot better. People have recognized, that we're living in the 21st century, well into the 21st century, and we should probably be
we're almost a quarter of the way in, Steve.
Yeah, making use of the technology that's available to us.
Yep.
So that at least is a little bit of a difference between this particular flood event and, that of 11 years ago.
Yeah. All right. So let's now get into a discussion about what clubs need to be doing now. And I'm reminded of a program that we used to run quite regularly, was a lot of workshops for the Queensland government and Northern Territory government and the New South Wales government in providing training and guidance for people involved in clubs. So great programs, and we still get to do a lot of that sort of work. And to be honest, as you know, but to be honest to our listeners, that's my favorite part of the job, because it's where we can impart the thinking that the thinking that we do, the knowledge that we have, but more importantly, because we get to talk to so many people in sport, we get to hear about their experiences and what they've learned, and then to be able to pass that information and all of their experiences on to everyone else. Because as we've discussed very recently, you shouldn't have to go it alone. You exist in a network, so it's fine to lean on that network. So in flood recovery in particular, let's talk about what are the takeaways. Number one, safety first. So, Dev, I don't know how you talk to your kids, but whenever we get out in the yard to do anything, be it change a tire on a car, or change a wheel on a car as a chance to learn something, or even just change the washer fluid in a car, or go and do some work with a lawnmower, safety first. Always safety first. I say safety first because you can't do safety second. Let me go and put my steel caps on now that I've crushed my toes. Yep. Safety first. So in this case, especially because of the cleanup, be as enthusiastic as you can, be as committed as you can, but be safe. So one of the notes that I've read on Facebook this morning was a plea for help at a clubhouse that is in the cleanup, and it said, wearing closed shoes, bring gloves, be careful. So, and that was a really good way to start. Some areas are taking it more seriously than that. So one council that we've been in contact with only this morning have said to all of their clubs, just don't go. If your club has been affected in any way, it is now completely off limits. So from a safety perspective and obviously a litigation protection perspective, maybe hence why I won't mention the name of the council, there's butt covering. We don't know what can go wrong. So we're going to do the best that we can to mitigate the chances of anything going wrong because of inexperienced human intervention by saying it's just out of bounds. Now, the two things obviously that come to mind there are that if you've still got a live electrical supply to a facility that is underwater, that is not going to be particularly safe. And the other one is obviously the risk of infection, so from contamination that's in the water. So you must do safety first.
Yeah, let us go and send the people who know what they're doing in, rather than you and your volunteers potentially going in and putting safety to the side in favor of focusing on, trying to expedite your cleanup and so on. I think that that's a really good, clear message that has come out of that council, and maybe one that will be adopted by others or is being adopted by others. And this, I think, there is going to be a time for volunteer labor, you know, that grey army that clubs will be calling out for, and in some cases are already calling out for. But I think it's a nice little reminder of the importance of engaging the right people to do the right work. And we've talked in the past and often do talk internally about the importance of getting construction work done, for instance, or work that requires people to work at height, done by professional contractors with the appropriate qualifications, accreditation and insurance, rather than just relying on volunteer labour. So this is a good reminder of the importance of that element of, you know, getting the right people in for the job. And councils, largely, as you know, the landlord of these sporting facilities from which a lot of your clubs operate, have an imperative to keep people safe, as do you. And it's important that you listen to them and to other authorities. You know, we're all pretty good now at listening to government regulations.
We've had a good couple of years
of learning on the job. Yep. So do take notice of the advice, and don't just go in all guns blazing trying to get the work done quickly.
It's a really, really good point, Steve. And there will be a time for volunteer support, but just wait until it's time, you know that it's safe to go in, because while we are keen to get things cleaned up and keen to get our facilities to a playable standard again, don't make things worse by putting anyone's safety or health at risk.
I've really liked, there was a book written by a Canadian astronaut that I think you gave me, and often in situations like
Hadfield.
There you go. Thank you. Often in situations like this, I'm reminded of one piece of advice that I think was imparted on him during his training at NASA, which is no matter how bad a situation,
he was on the space station when he
right. Okay. No matter how bad a situation is, there's always something that you can do to make it worse.
Yep. No matter how dire it is, you can always get in there and screw it up and make it even worse than it needs to be. Yep. Very, very good point. Yeah. So number 2 then is to communicate. So obviously the communication of the message of safety, if that is what is necessary. So if you don't know that it's safe to enter your premises yet, or you haven't communicated with council as landlord yet, then that's a really important step as well. This is a point that we made through COVID, that what we noticed was there was, for the groups that communicated well, and there's a skipping club in Cleveland that comes to mind because they were lauded as doing a great job. Even if there was no new information to communicate, they would still communicate that. So their members never got frustrated. They never felt disconnected from that club. And come time for activity to commence at the club again, everyone came back because they'd never really left, because they still had lots of touch points with the club through social media, through email. And it was direct, and it was very human in its messaging. And that's exactly what people should be doing now. So if you are affected, let everybody know, because maybe not everybody is following the news. Maybe not everybody is connected to their club, so particularly for some of the juniors who may not even have signed up yet. Make sure, from last year into this year, make sure that you are communicating so that everybody knows. So use social media, but also use your direct marketing channels as well. So if you're using an app, or if you're using email, then make sure that you are pushing messages out so that everybody feels that they know what's going on, and when they can expect more communication, or when they might be able to expect to be able to get back on the field as well. From there, we then get into how we actually do that. How can we get back onto the field? If our field has had shall we call it an unscheduled shitty top dressing, then how long is it going to be before we can use that field again? It's certainly going to be a long time, just because of the infiltration, how much of the ground is wet. It's like a big sponge, and where a sponge rebounds after you push into it, a sodden field typically won't. So then when it dries, you can end up with ruts. So one of those things that you can do to make things worse is to get onto the field and actually cause damage to it. So while your fields are closed, or while a club's fields are closed, this is where you can really explore the opportunities that exist within your network. So remember, we talked recently, Steve, about how an association isn't just an association for the purposes of competition administration. It's also a network of like-minded people who have access to similar resources. So where there are fields that have been spared, And they might, like we talked about recently, they might be other clubs, but they may also be in schools. Now is the perfect opportunity to look at what else may be available to you. And if you're doing that as part of a broader network rather than just as a member of one club, then maybe your opportunity to have discussions with school principals or with education departments goes up and therefore it has a better chance of success because you are working as a united front. The important thing to keep in mind, though, if you do have a field that has been spared, or if you are going to access a field that has been spared, to make sure that you are good stewards of that land while it becomes in greater demand as well. Because there's a significant risk of overuse of a field in any season. And of course, in Australia, our football season, our winter sporting seasons, where we play on big tracts of grass, is also not our good growing season. So if you do damage to a field now at the beginning of the season, it could be a dirt patch for the entire season. So do be careful. So then what does that mean? If we are restricted to the amount of training, if we're a 3 or 4 time a week team that trains, what else can we do? So now's the time to get innovative and this is purely about environmental stewardship. How can we be good stewards of the land that we have access to, especially if it's not ours, and especially if more people are going to be using it? So yes, we can spread our use over field areas, but also they don't need to be fields. You don't need lines for training. Are there other areas? So again, in your drawing on your network, but involving your council in this network, are there areas of parkland that have been spared that could accommodate the obviously daytime usage if there's no field lighting there, but could accommodate some training there because you just need an open area of land? What training can you do on footpaths? So what fitness training, running training can you do? Okay, you could go and do some extra sessions in the gym for strengthening and conditioning. But again, lots and lots of councils do a fantastic job with their park infrastructure where they have exercise stations in parks. Could we have coordinated use of some of those facilities while we are limited in our ability to access fields? Again, if you remember that if you look after the field in its recovery now for the next few weeks, and we're only talking a few weeks in this case, we're not talking about 2 years like the interruptions we had with COVID, can you just create a little bit of breathing space for your field so that it starts the season in a good condition rather than hammering it down? That's a massive risk. You do damage now, and as it gets colder and we stop getting the rain, then it's going to be really difficult for that field space to recover.
Yeah, go down the beach. Obviously, some beaches have been hammered by big swell and erosion, but there are areas of the foreshore which may be accessible that you can use for training purposes as well. But I like what you said about public fitness stations and so on, and making use of that sort of infrastructure if it hasn't been inundated and isn't surrounded in weeds and so on, like the local park on the way into the office this morning was for me. It's you do that double take and think, water didn't come that high. You look back at photos and think, oh yeah, you can't see that barbecue or picnic table.
Yeah. I was just thinking, as you said, do you go down the beach and do some beach training? It's all well and good for you to say that, who lives on the coast.
Yeah, good point.
I mean, if you're, I don't know, if you next time there's flooding in Cunnamulla, you can't, but then you could go and, when the river dries out, you can go and run on the riverbank, I suppose. Oh, okay. So that's what you can do right now. And then we get into the obvious one about preparedness for next time. So all of the things we talked about, what can go wrong, then consider those things. So what can you do to create some level of flood immunity, some level of disaster immunity in your facility? So obviously, Steve, you mentioned document and data storage and using technology that's available to us.
Yep.
What other things can clubs be doing to make sure that they are giving themselves the best chance to be prepared for flooding next time?
Reviewing things like insurance coverage is probably one that comes to mind. The number of times, and this is both in a club sense, but also in a personal sense, the number of people you hear after an event like this say, oh, I had no idea that I didn't have the right insurance coverage. So things like this are a really good opportunity to conduct a bit of a critical review of a club's insurance coverage, but also, other systems and storage locations. Just around the corner from my house, for instance, I know that there's an AFL cricket facility that's recently had a new building constructed, and I was keeping a really close eye on the photos of that particular sporting precinct to see how they'd gone in planning and designing this building and whether it was going to stand up to this flood, which it did.
Thank you for getting to the end. I was on the edge of my seat, Steve.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting. You'll see this type of construction of clubhouse, canteen, change room, building on sporting reserves, and it's a partially modular type construction, but it's set up quite high, and it's up off the car park level, which is in line with the playing field level. And it's funny that often that seems a little incongruent on the landscape when people come to a sporting reserve and see this building all set up, but it's set up for a very good reason. And often there'll just be an open void underneath the building, which in this case there is. But fortunately, not luckily, but due to good planning and design, the building did stand up to it. But
the car park and the fields were underwater.
Car park and the fields were well and truly underwater.
Okay,
yes.
So the water went under the car park. So this is one of those examples where they've set the clubhouse up without displacing the water. So it's in the floodplain. It's just on stumps.
Yep. So are there some mitigation measures like that you can take for the longer term? So building up. So if you can apply that same principle of setting your infrastructure up higher than the level of the rest of your facility, that can be a good opportunity to flood proof your facility in the future.
Yeah, and it obviously depends on where the water has come to. But even now knowing that, so if you have been flood affected and you can see council in your area's flood modelling, then you can determine where the likely flood levels are. So that can be important for rebuilds, as you say, Steve, or for new builds. But even to know at what height inside you should store things of importance. So at what level. So if you walk into some sporting clubhouses, Steve, no doubt you've noticed the power points are more at light switch height rather than down near the skirting board, because that means that all of the electrical circuits are set up above the expected flood levels based on flood mapping. So those are the sorts of planning things that you can do on a bigger scale. But even on a smaller scale and on a more regular scale operationally, the old just doing some training, remember at school we used to do the fire evacuation drills, just knowing that we have a process, because while it was raining and so all of our sporting fixtures were cancelled over the weekend, so nothing was actually happening because a lot of the fields were closed anyway. If a storm, for instance, hits while you are there, it's a good idea to let, again, through good communication, to let your members know that we have a plan and this is what it is. So should these sorts of things happen while we are here, this is most important. We're working on planning on one side at the moment where if flooding happens in a particular way, access to that site would be limited. You wouldn't be able to get onto the site. But that means that if it happened while you were on the site, you wouldn't be able to get off the site without crossing floodwaters, which if it's flooded, forget it. So as part of the operation for the clubs that are going to take a lease on that site once it's developed, that'll be a critical part of it. So if the club committee knows that and your council tells you those sorts of things, communicate them to members. So if you know of the risks and you know what you're able to do to mitigate against those risks for evacuation, then train it, let everybody know what they are. But then keep it in everybody's mind. Have it as a regular thing that happens at least once a year, because it's very easy with the transient nature of committees for these things to fall off the bottom. Just in looking at comments on one flooded photo this morning, there was a football club here that's gone underwater and it said, never and never has this place flooded ever before. And then a couple of comments down, it's flooded a lot since I've been here over the last 30 years. Admittedly, this is the worst, but it has flooded before. So even the fact that there is not as much of an understanding of the history of a club because of the transient nature of membership and membership of committees, pass that information on, and having a regular check-in and updating members on emergency and evacuation procedures is a really good way of doing that. And simply, the second last one is just have a good list of contacts. So if you know so just keep handy, obviously the police, but also police links. So the number to call when it's not an emergency, so not the 000 number, but also the SES, to council, utilities providers, so that you know who you can contact should things go wrong, or should you need to do something like have power emergency, a power cut off, or should you need to make some inquiries about having power reinstated. And the last one is run a good business so you've got money in the bank, because to go right back to the top, if we know that our sporting facilities are built on floodplains, we know we can expect that they will go under. So therefore we know that they will go under again. So we need to make sure that we are running the best business as we can making hay while the sun's shining, in this case, quite literally, to make sure that we are in a position to be able to recover and to be able to recover comfortably.
Yeah. Can I just add one more, which has come to mind during the discussion and also in looking at, some of those photos that you mentioned this morning? Keep the joint tidy. So often,
that's a really good one.
Volunteers who are involved in running these clubs are so busy getting kids out there on the field to play the game that they just completely overlook all of the junk that's lying behind the change room building, the old goal posts and lighting posts and, all of that crap that just builds up at a typical sporting facility. And that's the sort of stuff, you mentioned the shipping container earlier, but that's the sort of stuff that come hell or high water, again, literally, and turns into projectiles.
Yeah.
Both, yeah. Turns into projectiles. So not only do you lose that stuff because it ends up, miles away, but it can also pose a real additional hazard to emergency crews trying to deal with the situation at hand. So keep your facility tidy.
Yep. Very good point, Steve. Well, I'm sorry to put the dampener on a Basket Case Club's episode. I'm allowed, Steve. I do have kids, therefore I'm allowed to tell dad jokes.
Yep.
Thank you again for joining
that's
us.
That's why most of our listeners listen, is just for those wonderful little golden nuggets, which is a Michael dad joke.
Thank you for calling him wonderful. I'm going to take that all the way to the bank, Steve.
Yeah. And what you all can't see, I think Michael mentioned in the last couple of weeks, is his joke face. So as soon as he opens his mouth with joke face on, you're in for a groan.
Which is always terrible. When I think I may have said that when my kids are sitting there, when I'm trying it on with somebody, a new victim who doesn't know joke face, and I'm telling this story and I've got them hanging on every word, and then one of the kids will say, he's got joke face on, and the person will say, what's joke face? Like, seriously.
So the kids point to his face and say, that.
Yeah.
Wait for the shitty punchline. That.
Yeah. The groan and the eye roll. So yes, if you are not yet connected to us on social media, make sure you do, where you can follow us there. Connect to our newsletter as well, so we'll give you some interesting bits of information, and give us a call if you want to have a chat about anything, or if there's anything that you'd like to contribute to future episodes. Some of the ideas that have come in have now made it into episodes, and they certainly keep coming in. So stay in touch with us, because we always, in case you haven't been able to tell yet, we always enjoy a chat. Steve, as always, thank you for joining me on this little row our boat down the flooded lane.
Thank you, and take care, stay safe, and we look forward to hearing of some good news stories coming out of this, and clubs that have been well prepared, because they certainly are some of those clubs out there to deal with this situation. So look forward to catching up again next week. Thanks, Mick.
Yes, and keep your sleeves rolled up, because I'm sure that you, like me, will be out helping at some of the clubs near where you live as well.
Absolutely.
And thanks also to Jess, our wonderful producer and editor, who does a great job pulling everything together for us every week.
And particular thanks for cutting out some of the dad jokes.
All right, thanks everyone. See you next time.
See ya.